Hey friends, it's Brett, back with another episode of Seeking Our Spirit. Got a great episode for you today. I got to sit down with a friend of mine, colleague of mine, fellow Episcopal priest, the Reverend Mother Donna Brown. So it was a great joy to share in her journey, hear about her story. So I hope that you enjoy that. Also want to just say thanks to everybody for your kind support and encouragement. Thanks for listening to the shows and for sharing those out with people. Please continue to do that. Share them with folks that I don't know so we can continue to expand reach. Hit the like buttons, the follow buttons, the support button if you can. We're also a reminder we're on YouTube now. So even if you don't listen to the show or do much on YouTube, if you go over there and find Seeking Our Spirit and follow the show, that helps us a whole lot too. As always, the best way to help is to come on the show. So you all have a journey and a story. So I would love to have any of you on. Come forward, let me know you'd like to be on the show, and we'll get that done. If you don't want to be on the show, but would like to help and contribute, just tell a story. You can call me at 615-933-9737. Just leave a message and tell your story, and I can play that story on the show, or I can tell the story and relay it, and it'll be a good thing to have a conversation about. So thanks for all the support. Enjoy, and peace. We are up and rolling. Mm-hmm. My friend, Reverend Mother Donna Brown. Thanks for volunteering to come forward and do this with me, which, as people are probably annoyed with hearing me saying, is what I need, is people to come forward. So sure. I thank you for that. Mm-hmm. As we do always, to dive in, why don't you just give us a little, who are you, what you've done, your background?
Okay. Well, to put it in a brief thing, I was born in Worthington, Minnesota, the youngest of 3 children. And then I went to a college in South Dakota. A college is no longer there. Here in college, it's now Water Park.
Oh, okay.
So it was a small Presbyterian college. And then I married my college sweetheart, and we moved to Madison, Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. And I taught math. He was working for the state. We lived there about 5 years, and then he didn't like his job, so we moved actually back to North Dakota to kind of work for my dad for a year or two, and that didn't pan out. And then we moved to Rapid City, South Dakota, and opened a decorating center. And that was a tough thing to start a business. Mm-hmm. And after about a year, he went back to work for a corporate world while I continued with the store. And it was really built on my talents anyway.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I used to say my marriage failed. We had a son in Madison, Wisconsin. But I used to say my marriage failed, but now I say my failed marriage ended after 15 years because there were factors that just, had I been aware of it, red flags that I didn't see at the time.
Sure. And
for who I was and where I was in my life.
Right.
So I was suddenly single, and Eric was about 12, and I began to first be frightened about the future. And although my business at that time was very successful and provided enough income, and it had a good reputation, and it was an interior design business, and but I had never really made a choice in my life. I've always, the generation where you support your husband, even my parents, both college educated, said, well, of course you'll get an education, but you'll want to be a teacher because when you have children, you'll want to stay home with your children.
Yeah, right.
And being a teacher is just good insurance in case something happens to your husband. Yeah. But I never realized that my mother worked. But anyway, I heard that message. Yeah. But so here I was, 40 years old, and going through a divorce with a 12-year-old son, and I thought the word choice really became important to me, and I thought, I'm going to choose what I'm going to do. I don't want to be 50 years old sitting in Rapid City, South Dakota, saying I should have. I wanted, the choice could be continuing what I was doing, Or I could do what God wanted me to do.
Right.
Yeah. And
So you probably
it's always
entered into-
dangerous when you say that.
Yeah.
You never know where it's going to end.
Right.
Because I don't know if I knew where it was going to end, if I'd pursued that.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
nevertheless, I prayed about that. And of course, my nature is I did all I could to help God out. Yeah. For about 2 or 3 years. And ultimately, I realized I was being called to the priesthood. And there's some little factors involved with that.
Sure.
And
We can dig into
then,
all that.
yeah, at age 43, went to Virginia Seminary for 3 years. And I was ordained at age 46 and served as an active priest for almost 20 years. So
Yeah.
here I am.
Yeah.
And we've been retired for about 12 years living in Knoxville. So that's the nutshell.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
there's a lot of stuff along the way.
Yeah. Well, and if folks don't know you, you ended up remarrying, and
That's
your husband
right.
Ken is also
Is
a priest.
also a priest.
Yeah. And so you guys,
Yeah.
there's lots of stories there.
Yeah.
So good. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And I also, and I don't want to, I thought about this earlier, and I just want to say this before I forget it. It was interesting. I don't remember, and I hope I'm not going to offend anybody. I don't remember at my prior church as an associate at Ascension if we had retired clergy in the congregation. I really don't want to offend anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, Deacon Larry, of course, and folks like that. But in terms of just
Sure.
folks who had been rectors and had been, and so that just has been such a blessing to me to have you and Ken and Claire and Howard and folks that
Sure.
John. Just it's been a real blessing. So
Well, from a system standpoint, St. Elizabeth's has had retired clergy for a long time.
Right.
You had Jack Van Hoosen, and were active as much as he could in a wheelchair, and you had, I think it was Father Leach,
Yeah,
maybe,
David
who
Leach.
did a lot of pastoral care until he died.
Yeah.
And you have it in the history of the parish.
Yeah.
That retired clergy are an asset to the congregation.
Yeah, really, and to me personally. So anyway, just didn't want to skip that. But okay, well, so as you know, in this venture of mine, we're exploring what do we mean when we say spirituality, and just sort of seeing that through people's lives and their stories. So when you think of spirituality in Donna's life, where do you jump into that? I mean, in childhood, is it church? Is it what? Where do you jump in?
When I heard Blake's podcast, I resonated with that. I don't remember not knowing the presence of God.
Okay.
As a child, our family always went to church on Sunday. We always prayed grace before meals. And in Sunday school, I'm a visual person. I learn by seeing. My mind takes snapshots. I can almost see where I was sitting at 4 years old, and the flannel boards at that time. It was just a board covered with flannel.
Oh, yeah.
And telling a Bible story, such as the calling of the fisherman, and they were like paper dolls
Yep.
with a little bit of sandpaper on the back. So as the teacher would tell the story, they'd put the disciples up and then Jesus and all of that. And I loved it.
Oh yeah, flannel boards are great.
Yeah.
Bring
Oh.
back the flannel boards.
That's right. And I remember when I was 4 years old, I used this in a sermon once. I started by singing, "I will make you fishers of men if you follow me." That as a 4-year-old, I heard that story, and I was ready to jump up and follow Jesus, And then also the neighbor, well, I was giving a sermon as a seminarian, and somebody said, "Isn't that interesting? You were called to be a priest at age 4. Well, I never, thought of that. But my neighbor, when I was preschool, had something called the Sunshine Bible Club, where once a week you went to their home and then more Bible stories.
Oh, good.
So all of that was just part of the air that I grew up in.
Yeah.
And even when things were tough in our life, I've always sensed the presence of God. And, as parents, you don't always realize how your spirituality can influence your children.
Sure.
I remember being 12 years old, and we were on a farm, and a hailstorm happened. And I knew the seriousness of it because our year's crop was being destroyed. And I remember my dad standing at the back screen door looking out at the hail coming down, and I was standing a couple feet behind him. And I don't know if his shoulders actually slumped, but I knew the seriousness of it. And I was like, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And my dad turned around and said, well, God will provide.
Huh.
I didn't realize it was a deep theological moment at that time. But we made it through.
Yeah.
You know, God somehow did provide. But those types of things, I really were part of the life I grew up in.
Yeah.
Now, the parents weren't perfect. They were very busy and so on. But they gifted me with that.
Yeah, but just an awareness of higher power of God always through. Yeah. That's a lot
Presence of God.
Like my story for sure.
Yeah.
Good. Well, so as you sort of step back and look at kind of spiritual timeline for you, what are sort of some of the, well, both mountains and valleys? I mean, what are sort of those milestone moments for you? Anything you recall from childhood or adolescence
as thinking about it, I mean, I'm 77 years old, so I've had a few what I'll call nodal moments when it comes to God. And oftentimes, because I'm more of an experiential person, it's kind of both the joy and the sorrow. It's when something difficult happens.
You mean when you encounter God?
When I encounter God.
Sure.
I'm kind of like in a sermon. I heard a sermon once that oftentimes some of us are people who kind of have the God at the front burner and with the flame up. But when something bad happens, we say, where is God? And you move away from God.
Sure.
Then some of us kind of, things are going great. We kind of put God on the back burner on simmer. And when things happen, you pull them to the front burner. And this preacher said that a mature faith is one that is there through the difficult times and the good times.
Yeah.
So,
All burners on medium heat.
Yeah, on medium heat. Right. So that influenced me. But, I thought of several. The first one was probably when I was 21 years old and had dated my college sweetheart for 3 years, and we were beginning to talk marriage. But he was Catholic, and I was Methodist. And he said that he couldn't change. So I thought, well, I went to see a Catholic priest, and he said, well, classes are starting on Thursday. And actually, my boyfriend would go to hell if he stopped being Catholic because he was a member of the 1-2 church. And if he left it, he'd go to hell. Whereas he couldn't say that about me because I hadn't had the opportunity to be in the 1-2 church.
It's nice when things are that clear.
That's right. Yeah, it was very clear. And so he said, but here's a book you can take. Well, you know, I never got to those classes on Thursday because I read the first chapter of the book, and it's like, okay, for the man I love, I can do that, but kind of white-knuckling it. Second chapter, same thing. I got through all the chapters and said, okay, for the man I love, I can do this. But then they said that you'll have to, in your first confession, you have to confess your sins from your baptism forward. And I was baptized at 5 months old, and I was 21 years old. But it also said, and I'll paraphrase, that it's probably more convenient if you become rebaptized. And then you only have to confess your sins in the 30 minutes between that and, I remember.
I've never heard that.
Well, that was, in the 60s. So things have changed since then. But that's just
Wow.
So I threw the book down and I said, I cannot deny 21 years of a relationship with God.
Yeah.
That was it.
And remind me what kind of church you grew up in?
Methodist.
That's right. Okay.
A church of God is love.
Yeah.
No fire and brimstone. So that was a notable event because I would even give up the man I loved because I had a relationship with God that I couldn't deny.
Yeah.
So that's a notable event. Well, then I married the guy, and I kind of put some notes here so I keep on track. I told him. He said he'd change. And I said, well, I'm not going to have a mixed marriage because your parents are mixed marriage and your dad doesn't go to church and your mother does. And marriage is tough enough without having God in your life. So we moved to Madison, Wisconsin for his job, and we found the Episcopal Church. And that's how I became Episcopal.
Okay.
Good Catholic Methodist compromise.
Yeah. And did he... click there too?
Yeah, because the liturgy was very comfortable to him. And it was not comfortable to me, at the time. But I knew, and going through confirmation class, it was just a beautiful framework within which I could fit.
Cool.
So that's how I became Episcopalian.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, then we ultimately moved from Madison, Wisconsin. Our son was born there, Eric. And I kind of made a note that everything seemed kind of good. I mean, we had good jobs. And I thought things were good, but it was only years later that my college friends, who were teachers, would come down to Madison to visit me for a week every summer. And years later, they told me that they could see some changes in me. They said during the day when his name was Ron, when Ron was at work, it was the Donna they knew. We laughed a lot and played a lot and just had a great time. But when Ron came home, I disappeared.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So they noticed that at the time. I didn't, of course. But he was highly critical. And I suppose another moment was when I decided that, God loves me. And I don't have to have a clean house. I don't have to be smart. I don't have to be beautiful. And I don't even have to be thin to be loved by God. And that was a moment when I kind of hung on to that.
Yeah.
Because I had somebody who was telling me all the opposite things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a small nodal moment.
That's it. Well, no, I mean, that stuff's interesting, and it comes out quite often in these conversations with people, how we tend to conflate God with our Father or God with a spouse. And what's interesting, too, is, I've never thought about this. I'm just talking out loud here, but I think because just how our language works, and we tend to call God He, even if intellectually we don't, understand God as masculine or feminine or anything, but people tend to, I only see the thing we're talking about, that conflation, really with male, right, with husband or father, or so it's interesting. I've actually never thought about if like men that I interview in any way have conflated mom with God.
Well, that's why I think the image of God being male is a detriment to both men and women.
Oh, sure.
My New Testament teacher, Barbara Hall, said to the class, by the way, you'll hear me call God He. And that's not because I believe God is a He. God is God.
Right.
But I'm a woman, and she says if I call God He, I can't confuse myself and think I'm God. Now, you men, she said, probably would benefit if you think of God as a woman. Then you can't, in your mind, attain to being God.
Yeah.
Instead of God.
That's an interesting angle. I like that. I've never heard that before.
And my father, I just loved my father. So I had a really positive image of male with my dad. So
good.
I didn't have that struggle. But of course, years later with things, I became a feminist because things around me weren't always, equal. So,
That's good. And so, like, it's interesting because so far, I don't have the words for that. I'm always wanting in my own mind to say, like, all right, so what is the language that God uses to speak to Donna? And it's interesting because so far, the way you've described things in your life, it's a little bit hard to distinguish because it as you said, you always felt like you had a relationship with God, and so like God's just right there with you in the stuff, So, so is it like in these moments when you were, say, discerning about marriage or the Catholic Church, or later about divorce or the priesthood, what does that look like for you? Was that you're praying? You said. But like, how do you experience God responding to you? Is it the serendipitous sort of nods from the universe, or is it a gut thing, or is it?
Well, I grew up in the Dakotas, so everything was head stuff. We didn't have feelings there because it's hardscrabble life.
Yeah.
And feelings were a luxury that we didn't have. So I oftentimes worked with my head, even though I've really discovered I am a feeling person, a four. I'm thinking when I was 21, I don't know where it came from. I just remember saying, I can't do that. I can't pretend that I haven't had God in my life.
Yeah.
It was just it.
Yeah.
And for me, the present, it's like breathing. It's like, it's just there.
Yeah.
I do have one major one where it was a physical
Oh, okay.
response.
Like physical feeling or visual?
Oh, yeah, physical. I mean, I had cried out to God deeper than I ever had. And it was, again, a difficult time.
Yeah.
And I got a physical response. It was just
Well,
beautiful.
tell me that story.
Well, after about 15 years, the marriage was ending. And he had left. He had other interests, female interests. So that, yeah. But anyway, so Eric was about 12, and there was some concern on whether I'd have a car to drive. So my parents drove down from North Dakota to Rapid City, South Dakota, about a 7-hour drive to pick me up because they had an extra car that I could have. It was a 3-day weekend in the fall. So we rode back to North Dakota and, spent a couple days. And on Monday, I got in this old car with Eric, and we proceeded to leave town. And about 5 miles out of town, the car broke down.
Oh.
And it's Monday of a 3-day weekend. There's no mechanics. So got a hold of my parents, and they came and brought their good car. And Eric and I got in it, and we took their good car to Rapid City while they dealt with the broken car. But we got a late start that day because of all this. And so it's a 7-hour drive, and it became dark, and Eric was, with me in that time front seat. We weren't into seat belts so much.
Yeah.
And we drove through Pier. I think we got McDonald's Pier, and then it was dark. And Eric was kind of slept on the front seat, kind of straddled out. And, there was a lot in my life that I didn't know. It was just...
It's all up in the air.
All up in the air.
Yeah.
And pain, lots of pain. And there was a full moon in the south. I'm driving kind of southwest across South Dakota. Full moon in the sky. And that was God. And it was with me all the way to Rapid City. It was just that presence of God. So we got home about midnight, and Eric went to bed, and the phone rang, and it was my soon-to-be ex-husband checking on us, and we had some words. And we hung up, and I remember just deeply crying out to God. Absolutely, from the core of my being.
Sure.
Said, Lord, help me. And this warm feeling started. I'm laying down in bed at the top of my head and started moving all the way down my body to the tips of my toes. And I rolled over and went to sleep. And when I woke up in the morning, it was like the life had changed.
Yeah.
There was this peace. So, if there's ever a question about, is there a God? I know there is. I've experienced it physically. So that was probably the most, I don't know what you call it, tangible.
Yeah. Sure. Those are important and powerful.
Yeah.
That just curiosity, I'd like to dig a little bit there. Like warmth. Did you also feel? And this is probably long ago, and I don't know if you remember this, but was there also like almost a pressure?
Oh, you could feel it move. It was with the warmth came peace. It was as if this presence moving through my body was stripping away the concerns and so on. It was this peace that washed all the way through, and rolled over and went to sleep and woke up peaceful. Yeah, and with a whole different perspective.
You think that was just because of, just like with the moon? I mean, it just that physical sensation really drove home that you're not alone, and that
absolutely,
yeah.
And so anyway, and at those days I operated with my head a lot because we didn't even have a vocabulary for feelings. So probably I was like doing everything to help God out with whatever. So to really absolutely opened my heart, my broken heart, to God. And God just came and filled it with that peaceful love, which carried me through the next couple of years of the divorce and so on. Yeah. But it changed me.
Yeah. And that's before you ever had any inkling towards seminary, right?
Oh, no. That came next.
Yeah. I'm so curious. I mean, this is just an aside, but I'm just curious because I don't know. It's been so long since I've read like the saints or like any of the sort of mystic, desert fathers or whatever. But it's so fascinating to me because that description of warmth seems to be universal, and I would love to see if they wrote. I don't recall them writing about those experiences, but people have heard me talk about whether it's through. I mean, I've had sensations like that through like other sort of experimenting with things like Reiki or whatever, but then also I've had feelings like that in the middle of the Eucharist. That's just. I'm always hot. But it's different. It's not the same. I'm always hot, but there's something that I can feel, much in the way that you describe, physical. That sort of comes over. And
so it's a capital letters, IKNOW, that there's God. Yeah. Even all the other times I knew God was there, but this was really knowing. Yeah. So, and then after that, going through therapy, because when you're in a emotionally abusive marriage is what it was for 15 years. You have a lot of healing to do.
Oh, sure.
And so I really worked hard with that. And in that time was when I began to realize that I'd never made choices for me, and began to pray that maybe I could do what God wanted me to do, which could have been continuing what I was doing or being open to God. And as I was talking to a woman, Presbyterian minister, when I told her that I told God that God could have me, she says, "Oh dear." Yeah. And there was some to that, because I think once the counselor I've been counseling with had moved back to town and hadn't seen me for a couple of years, so when we met, he couldn't believe this Donna that he met. Yeah. So vastly different than the previous one that was in a prison of sorts. Because if you shut down, you have to, when you're in an abusive marriage, you have to shut down the faucet that's called feelings. Yeah. And basically, if you shut that faucet, it really shuts down the whole emotional system. I could sing solos in church, I could run a business, I could do speaking things, but the emotional system was just shut down. Right. Because your pain threshold, you've raised your pain threshold. If you can't say ouch, you raise your pain threshold, and you can have all these feelings that you don't feel because the threshold is high. So I had a lot of hard work to feel the feelings. They say you have feelings twice. You feel them going in and you feel them coming out. Yeah. And I had a lot of stuffed feelings.
Never heard that. Yeah.
So they had to come out. And so a lot of hard work with that. But ultimately, the counselor that I saw again, I told him what had been happening. And he said, "Have you considered the priesthood?" I said, "No." I said, "I often thought I'd make a good minister's wife," which I think he shook his head at, because again, you're assistant to the man.
Yeah, putting yourself down. Yeah. Why do you think he said that?
Well, he wasn't even Episcopal. He was like Free Methodist or something, kind of a conservative thing. I don't know. I think I'd shared with him some moments I'd had, and that I was in this journey of trying to discern what God wanted me to be. And he knew of me before, and yet I was sharing some instances, where I remember sitting in the back porch early in the morning with a cup of coffee, and I remember being in my business and saying, "God, I don't know what you want to do with me. I have a little bit of speaking skills. I have a little bit of counseling skills, and I have some management skills, but I don't know what you do with that weird combination. But I'm getting tired of trying to help you out with that, and I'm just going to go have fun." Yeah. So Lord, if you want me, you have to catch me. And it's kind of like the minute I let go,
Yeah.
it stopped, it's the Dakota in me.
Yeah.
That was trying to help God out.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. But once I really let go and just focused on living that new joyful life that I had, there were some God incidences that made it clear.
Yeah.
And I was called to the priesthood.
Yeah.
Well, when he put that on there, have you considered the priesthood? I couldn't shake it. When I saw him a few weeks later, I said, Tom, remember what you said?
Yeah.
Very clearly, he said. I said, I can't make it disappear.
Uh-huh.
And then I spent a year or so telling God how stupid it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, stupid. I use that word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just,
Yeah.
I have similar parts of my story there. Sort of as you're talking, and again, I just, it takes me so long to process. So it's hard for me to put words around these things as they're coming. But like something I just sort of saw, I don't know if this clicks for you, but it seems like in terms of how God sort of communicates with you or relates to you in your life, it really was all feeling. Like you felt within you, whether that was the physical one, in the bed that evening, or all the other instances you've described. It's really a feeling, a sense within you. And so I don't know, it just sort of really drove home to me, and I don't mean to like touch a tender spot too much, but what hit me was then like, how truly deeply difficult and sad than a relationship or a marriage that forced you to
not feel,
mute all those feelings.
Absolutely.
Had to be.
Oh, it was, yeah. And to recover from that takes.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I had a friend who is a saint. She's deceased now. And we'd have coffee, and she just, that stuff had to come out.
Yeah.
And for, I'd say, almost a full year, I would think of things that had happened that I hadn't felt before.
Yeah.
And this saint listened to me. All she did was just listen.
Yeah.
And so I just had to get it out. And you felt that pain coming out. You have to get it out. Otherwise, it's like trying to hold a balloon underwater.
Yeah.
Or a beach ball underwater. It's fine at first, but after a while, it's just, you can't do it. And so,
It's interesting too that because you often, as you have today, make statements about like, well, being from Dakota, like we didn't have a word for feelings or whatever. But so even that is an interesting dynamic because it seems very naturally within you is the feeling.
It is.
And then the culture or family system was telling you no. So it's an interesting dynamic.
And then I married a man who didn't want to fight.
Right.
In fact, in seminary, when we were doing lit practicums, and talking about marriage, and Andrew Merrill, very well-regarded priest, was our teacher. There are three of us, and he said when he does premarital counseling, he tells a couple that he feels the most important thing for them is to learn to fight fair.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sure.
And I wasn't allowed to fight, you know, or even express feelings.
Yeah. I've had, with premarital counseling, like I'm not harsh enough to do this, but I was tempted to just tell a couple, you haven't even had a real fight yet, so I can't do this with you. Yeah. But I have gone as far as saying, like, this is, you have to learn how to fight.
You have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, but freedom, that word freedom, it just means a lot to me because it's, I think one thing that influenced me is the counselor, Tom, again, suggested this, or somebody did along the way anyway. A lot of people along the way. I had a lot of saints along the way. Little book, Brother Lawrence, Practicing the Presence of Prayer. And it's about a little monk who worked in the kitchen. And he just prayed all day long, praying, carrying out the garbage, and prayed over the, it's just that constant presence.
Sure.
I'm not real good with formal prayers unless I read them out of the Book of Common Prayer. Yeah. I call them steering wheel prayers.
Yeah.
Okay, God, we need to talk.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's even that's funny how different people sort of dependent upon how you communicate, right? That then affects the way you relate to God. Sure. Yeah. Well, good. So I know we're jumping
That's
all
okay.
over, and it sort of does feel like, in some sense, like there's like first. You tell me if I'm wrong, but like around priesthood, like there is sort of like first half of life, second half
absolutely.
of life in a way. Yeah.
I was born into an era that for women you were the secondary, and on the farm comes first, and women would not only do the dishes and cook the meals and can the food and all of that, but also work in the field when necessary. It's interesting to me that the first state that gave women the right to vote was Wyoming, not East Coast, Wyoming, because you can't survive out there with one hand tied behind your back.
Yeah.
Men and women have to work side by side. So now I don't know why I got on that.
Oh, that's okay.
But,
yeah. Well, we were talking about first half of life, second half of life.
Right, absolutely. And the second half of life is really that freedom. And I worked very hard to become who God intended me to be. I think I've told people one of the biggest sins that I have committed in my life was to give up who I was.
Yeah.
And
that comes through in your story, just the journey of that, of rediscovering.
Yeah. In fact, I don't know if I said this, but one of the college friends that had visited us years ago lived in Minneapolis, and I got a phone call. This is after the divorce and so on, and I was well on my way to freedom. She called and said, Donna, we're in Rapid City, Steve's taking the kids to Storybook Island, and I thought maybe we could have coffee. I said, absolutely, come on over. And so she came over, and we were having coffee, and within 10 minutes, she stopped, and she says, Donna, you're back. And I said, what do you mean? She said, this is the old Donna. And and that's when she told me about how, when visited me years earlier, probably 15 years earlier, that in Madison, that during the day I was Donna, that they knew in college.
Right.
Just wanting to have fun, and yet when my husband came home at night, I disappeared. So that's when she told me that story. So there's this, it's kind of like no matter what happens in life now, I love life.
Yeah.
I know, okay, somebody saw me. She hadn't seen me for 5 years. She saw me before in church, singing solos and singing in trios and all of this stuff. But then she married a priest and went to New York City and came back to the Black Hills for a vacation. So she hadn't seen me in 5 years, and I was out at Camp Remington, a camp they designed for poor clergy. And I was not ordained at the time. And, we were just friends and visiting at night. And after church on Sunday, she said, Donna, I have a friend who's a recovering alcoholic, and he said he knows death because that's what he lived all the years that he was actively drinking. But now he knows resurrection because that's the life he lived now. She says, Donna, if ever I have seen a resurrection, it's in you.
Yeah.
And that was accurate because and I'll take responsibility, I let somebody kill me off inch by inch.
Yeah.
And so to me, life is resurrection.
Yeah, I love that too because, really, it's what I've been attempting to talk about recently in sermons. But just moments like that where people, where that clicks for them, that Jesus wasn't just talking about some place we go and we die, and that if we believe in him, we have this golden ticket. But it's that.
Absolutely.
Because in order for that guy in addiction to get there, in order for you to get there, you had to. That's what is picking up the cross.
It had to break open.
You had to go into the shadow.
Absolutely.
You had to go into death. You had to die to self.
I had to die to self.
And that's what, and then you come to new life. Yeah.
I'll have to tell you, though, when I was in seminary then, some of the professors, this one would frequently say, the theology of the cross, you have to die to self daily. Well, somebody like me, that didn't sit too well.
I know, that's a hard, Because
I know death.
Yeah.
But don't tell me I have to die again.
Yeah, right.
But of course, we have moments when we die. But so one of the first papers I did was on the theology of the cross. And I found out in research that if in the theology of the cross all you focus on is dying, it's inadequate. If all you focus on is resurrection, it's inadequate.
Right, exactly.
It's death and resurrection together.
Right, all the time.
All the time, yeah. And I think you find that a lot in feminist theology, because a lot of the preaching and so on is about dying to self. And as I said to a Lutheran person who, in CPE that had to preach, and always preached on sin. The first half of the sermon was sin, and then I said, maybe you Lutherans think that you need to wake up in the morning and pick the cross off the nightstand and hit yourself on the head with it to remind yourself that you're not God.
Yeah.
But some of us need to reach over and pick that cross up and remind ourselves how loved we are.
Right.
Yeah. So again, it's that ambivalent, or I don't know if it wouldn't be ambivalence. It's
balance.
Yeah. So it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that I've had the life I've had. I sometimes wonder what I'd be like if I hadn't, but I just am thankful. And then, of course, Ken, that's a real gift for me. He was a priest, and I was newly ordained, and he's just, he doesn't like the way I don't keep house. He has to pick up after me, but he's a very loving man, and
gentle soul.
Yeah, we have a good life together. That I didn't expect. I thought I'd probably be single the rest of my life, because actually my first husband told me that, well, when Eric told him that I was going to be a priest, he said, "Well, how can your mother be a priest? She's so hard." And I said to Eric, "Isn't it sad? I spent 15 years with your dad, and he doesn't know who I am." And then he also told me at one time that I just wasn't marriage material. I should never. I'm not the type to ever get married. So I kind of just bought into that, saying, I guess, well, I'll be single the rest of my life.
Yeah, yeah.
But God gifted me.
I love. It's part of what I just love about doing these conversations, and I know I say it all the time, but it's like, we interact with people. You and I have served or taught together, and we're in the church, and we're friends and colleagues, and sometimes consult one another. All these things. So I know you well in certain contexts, but then having a conversation like this just exposes whole other levels. And so what I love is like, you to me come across always. It doesn't take people long when they get to know you to know, like, okay, Donna, strong, feminist, all these things. But knowing the why is
Absolutely.
So cool, Yeah. Because now it's just like, that makes sense. I mean, this is coming from this place of experience. And
I had a real gift. Just before my father died, I was back at Christmas time seeing my father and mother. I was a senior in seminary. And they were in bed in the king-size bed, and I was at the foot of it, talking to them and so on. And I guess I said something about, well, that in our family, men were more important than women. And my dad said, well, you didn't get that from me. And I said, and I'd worked a lot of things out with my mother, but I said, well, yes, I did, Dad. And he seemed shocked by that. And anyway, I mentioned a little bit. I said, Dad, I'm a feminist. He said, well, what? A Christian feminist. He said, what do you mean? I said, I believe that men and women stand on level ground before God. And my dad said, well, then I'm a feminist too. And little did I know that, a few months later he would die. But that was a real gift to me. That just men and women stand on level ground before God. And I guess living into it.
Yeah, and powerful that comes from your father.
Yeah.
Would you, I know we're just having fun chatting, but so like that story, the experience you shared of the warmth, right, in the presence of God, have all your quote unquote spiritual experiences been that feeling? Or have you had others?
Well, that was physical.
Yeah.
That was physical. I can't say the others were that dramatic because it's just knowing.
Right. Okay.
It's just, it's just like breathing in and breathing out.
It's an interesting distinction for me because, when I say knowing, that comes from the gut.
Yeah.
So I associate knowing with feeling for some reason.
Yeah.
Like it's a gut sense to me, and that's how I know.
Yeah. And mine's experience. I experience God, and I don't know if that comes from the gut or not. But
yeah.
I think because I had suppressed my feeling both in my family system and in my first marriage, I operated so much with my head. Ask me what I felt, and I'd tell you what I thought.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I had to learn a new vocabulary.
Yeah. Well, do you have other experiences come to mind for you that moments of, God moments?
Oh, yeah.
Inbreaking of the Spirit?
One. I was a freshman in seminary. I'd moved 2,000 miles. I have a friend who has inherited some wealth and actually supported me through seminary. And she was from Virginia, Southwest Virginia. And her husband was a banker, and they were in D.C. I was in Alexandria, Virginia. She was in D.C. for something with his banking. And so we got together, and she told me that when her grandma died in Southwest Virginia, that Heath, the bishop of Southwest Virginia, was a first cousin to her mother. And so she said, Heath did the funeral. And she said she went up to Heath, first name bishop, and said, Heath, next time you're at the seminary, look at my friend Donna. She's just my best friend, and she's going to be a priest, and we're so proud of her. And he said, is she one of those middle-aged, menopausal, divorced women?
Oh, no. Jeez.
And Connie said, yes. And he said, well, Bishop Lee and myself and other bishops don't want any more of that kind in the church.
Wow.
So I remember very much where I was standing, again, the visual snapshot, in my apartment. And I remember shaking my fist at God.
Yeah.
And saying, I don't know why you're calling me into your church, only to be abused and misused again.
Yeah, the theme is so strong.
Sure. And I said, if you want me in your church, I can't give up being me again. I have to go being totally who I am. And if you want me in the church, you're going to have to open doors. Because I'm not going to give up being me in order to enter in. And so it was another of those moments when it was like, well, God, I'll die for you, but I'm not going to die for your church.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I guess those moments when I just hit a painful moment and had given up so much to go to seminary.
Yeah.
And
It just, though, it's so striking to me that to a T, all of these experiences have been around the same theme.
Sure.
Which is, it blows my mind of like how in some ways each of our individual lives are a story about relationship with God. And that's something that, you've heard me, I won't go into it here, but I've recently discovered that, and it was through the Enneagram, and then looking back at my call story and realizing this was God working in me to make me my most full self. And so it's that long arc story of our lives. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I think God gave me these gifts. I remember one time at breakfast after Bible study, this retired colonel in the Air Force was spouting off and said, well, I couldn't. I don't know why women want to be in positions where it's a man's world. He says, I flew airplanes and I wouldn't have wanted a woman next to me. He says, because they're so emotional that, if things get tough, they're just emotional. Well, he didn't know that I was in the process of ordination or, moving towards priesthood. My mentoring priest did. Yeah. And of course, it rankled right up. And I said, well, I got to tell you, if push came to shove and I had to depend on somebody, I'll take a woman first because they're going to do what's right, And anyway, I don't know what I said. And I said, I've often wondered why God would give me intelligence if I'm supposed to be dumb and not use it, or why God would give me leadership skills if you're supposed to keep it down here and not exercise them.
Yeah.
Why would God give you these gifts and talents if you aren't to use them fully? So, anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I think yes, I think where I'm come from, but if you go into my family system, there's that determination. Now, my son called it stubborn when he was a teenager. Mom, you're stubborn. And I said, Eric, I prefer to call it determination. And it's what gets you from here to there. And you have a bit of it too. But I had one person who in midlife became anorexic. And she said, but why did you, we were sharing stories, why did you, Donna, come out of it? And I went into anorexia. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just...
Yeah.
I don't know why some of us succumb forever, but what frightens me is I might have stayed in that first marriage forever. And this counselor says, no, you can't remain in sin forever. So, anyway. But life is good.
Yeah.
Most days.
Yeah. So, what about in the church? I mean, just any other sort of experiences? It feels like we still I don't know, what would you name in terms of priesthood era of Donna, right? Like,
well,
in terms
it's
of
Donna,
God.
of course, being fully who she was.
Yeah. So and I hadn't thought about that. So yeah, good point, right? So there you go, and you are leading a church, and you are the one calling the shots, and you are
Sure. Well, and even when I was interviewing for an assistant position. At the party, one of the wives cornered me and said, well, you're divorced. How do you think you can be an effective priest when you've been divorced? And I said, well, I really think that's probably one of the best gifts I bring to my priesthood. Because I know what a failed marriage is like.
Sure.
And I also know what a successful one is like.
Sure.
And
and just the experience of hitting some type of rock bottom in life, just those prayers you say from your knees, crying out,
And then as I was an assistant or associate for 7 years, and then I found myself saying if I was in charge, I would. Plus, I was working under a clinically depressed rector. But I was in last stages of several churches, but the one in Silver Spring, Maryland, St. Mark's, I was drawn to it because they had been through some really rough times.
Yeah.
And I felt that they were on the verge of resurrection. And I felt that I was called to help lead them there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's that theme through.
Yeah. Well, and it's I wouldn't have put this together until you just said that, but in some ways, at least in retirement, in some ways that's what you and Ken have been doing too. Right? In churches.
I don't know.
Being there in their times of transition.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? In times after they've gone through a rough time, being a stable presence there.
Sure. Yeah, and Ken is just steady Eddie.
Yeah.
I kind of, and being married to him has freed me up to kind of be more playful because he's the responsible one. And I was the youngest child. Being responsible was not my natural sense. I just wanted to bounce along and have fun, but I had to be responsible my whole life.
Yeah.
So he's a real gift with that. But and as a priest, it was, I think, bringing that steadiness, bringing love of God. And I think, and it was a troubled parish. There was a group there trying to kill me off. They had been at a number of different churches and had left a trail wherever they'd been. And people in the diocese, I think, were wondering how long I'd last.
Yeah.
But I had a good bishop who was 200% behind me. And so we managed as a congregation. I think it was a very healthy congregation by the time I left 11 years later.
Yeah.
So I think I did, in many ways, help usher them into a period of health and wholeness.
Yeah, new life. Yeah.
So, and in retirement, I'm not on the supply list because, Ken.
Because I keep you busy.
Oh, yeah, that's probably true too.
No.
I had to learn to play. Because I kind of take things seriously, and you know that being a priest, it's 24/7. I don't care if you're out fishing or whatever you're doing, it's still on your shoulders.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I didn't do well with balancing work and play.
Yeah.
And so I just, when we finished our last interim, I said, nope, I'm not going to do another one. I've got to learn to play.
Yeah.
So I do art now, and what else do I do? Well, singing, of course, has been part of my life the whole time. Gardening, Ken and I did that together, but now we're getting to where we can't. But now we have somebody. She doesn't speak a lick of English, but she's a hard worker, and we'll pull weeds and do whatever. So yeah.
This question I ask everyone, and maybe you're not ready to go here yet, but is the story you told your sort of quote unquote most intense or real or important spiritual experience, or do you have another?
Well, I kind of took a few notes here and have some boxes. I think I've covered them. Probably one.
Yeah, well,
it's
just
kind
like,
of going back is when I was discerning a call to the priesthood and kind of reaching the end point. And in our diocese of South Dakota, they had what's called summer seminary, so that a lot of the Indian clergy who were going to be deacons could go. So I said to my mentoring priest, I'm going to go to summer seminary. And if I go and say, ooh, this is not what I want to do, I said, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
Because I've been discerning for 2 or 3 years. And
Yeah.
he was totally behind me. And anyway, and I remember it's 2 weeks, and I remember 3 God incidences clearly that happened during that, where I came out of that knowing.
What were those?
Well, the first one was a woman from Minnesota who was there, and we were sitting having lunch, and she was asking about me, and I said, well, I have a business, design and so on. And she says, well, what are you going to do after that? And I said, well, I have this business, I mean, I never talked about after that. And she said, you're going to be a priest, aren't you? And I had introduced myself as a lay person, and one of the courses was counseling, that the people come,
Yeah.
So I had never mentioned
Interesting.
it.
Yeah.
Then the other one was I saw a woman priest in practice for the first time in my life. And she was in class and, kind of small and didn't say much. But when she was behind that altar, the air just sparkled. And she made a couple changes for inclusive language that just, I'd never felt excluded, but it pulled me in.
Yeah.
And afterwards, I went up to Father Hennis, and I couldn't speak. I couldn't, and I can talk.
Yeah.
But I was speechless.
Yeah.
And he said to whoever was there, this, it was because there was a woman.
Yeah.
I couldn't envision myself behind the altar. And the third one was I was walking down the hall, and I can't remember her name, but she was from Pierre, and she was on the Commission on Ministry. I was walking down, and I guess I had done a little snippet, a little homily or something. She said, she stopped me, put her hands on her shoulders, and said, you are called. So those 3 things happened in that 2-week period.
Yeah.
Where I just said, okay, God, I'm not going to fight it anymore, because I had been fighting it.
Yeah, sure.
You give up a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And yet there again, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's a gift for me today just to see that thread, that story in your life where it's the same thing that I have, just a different way. It's funny because I don't even, like, you fought with being told your voice is nothing and you are nothing, right? And and you needed to embrace that voice, right? Yeah. And it's similar, and I'm not going to do this to our listeners, but like we could have this conversation in terms of Enneagram also, the difference between like you are 4 and I'm 9. I have the same story, but I the last thing I wanted was a voice, right?
Okay,
and I rejected it and didn't want it, and whatever. And yet that also is becoming my therefore, right? Because it's the thing I don't want.
Yeah.
It makes me more balanced, it makes me a more full self.
Well, you talk about preparation for the priesthood, and everything I've mentioned today has been preparation for the priesthood, to be a priest. I mean, all the hard times, it's all been, I think, a gift to those who I served.
Yeah, sure.
And so it's, again, taking those tough times. I remember one time saying to God, I have to learn different than experience, Lord, because this is just hard to experience things and learn from your experience. Can't you just tell me?
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. So we'll wrap up here, but
sure.
but I'm curious, just because of all the stories you've told, right? And we sort of we poked at this a little bit about, is it gut, is it feeling, what's the experience of it like? So what about in prayer life for you?
Okay.
What does that feel like? What is that experience like?
It feels like practicing the presence of prayer with Brother Lawrence. I had a neighbor who was a Catholic nun, this is in seminary, becoming a priest, and she thought that I needed to be straightened out with my prayer life, because she got up every morning at 5 o'clock and prayed from 5 to 6 to her. Jesus was her soul, her husband, I guess, in a sense.
Yeah.
And she thought that I had a spiritual director who was Catholic, and she was very pleased with that, because she knew that Catholic spiritual director would straighten me out and get my prayer life on track.
Right.
So I went to the spiritual director and I said, well, I want to talk about prayer today. And she said, what do you want to talk about? I said, well, Mary Ann said that, that you'd teach me how to pray. My spiritual director said, Donna, that's not your style.
Yeah.
She says, let me teach you a form of prayer without words. You're in seminary. You listen to words all day long, you read words, and you write words. Let me teach you a type of prayer without words. And again, it was putting some music on and just trying to empty myself.
More meditative.
Yeah, empty myself. And then it was amazing that what would pop into my mind.
Yeah.
And for prayer, I oftentimes will say, Lord, this is interesting that this popped in my mind. If this is something I'm supposed to pay attention to, keep it coming. If not, just let it go. So I kind of, give God a chance to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when it keeps coming, in what way does it come? Like if something in that instance keeps coming,
it's a
is
thought.
it just in life? It just shows up, keeps popping up.
It's a thought. It pop, and sometimes it'll pop.
Doesn't leave
just
you
like
alone, like the priesthood.
Just like the 3 people who.
Right.
Yeah.
Pops up in life, doesn't leave you alone.
It pops up in life. Yeah. It's there.
Yeah.
And it won't go away.
The nods from the universe.
Sure.
I call it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do kind of steering wheel prayers, and again, when your sense is just this constant presence, it's not formality. And got to confess that the Lecta Divino doesn't work real well for me right now, because when I empty myself, I feel all my body parts that hurt.
I'm sorry.
No, it just is.
Yeah.
So, because you keep busy, my thoughts and stuff, so I don't pay much attention to the pain.
Yeah.
But when I try to do that, it's like...
I hear you. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I had another question.
It's floating around here. There's a lot of things that float around. They come back and land.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, any last chance? Anything else that you really wanted to
No, I think
tell or
we've covered
share?
it. I just want to say thank you for being you.
Yeah.
I just, it's, when you're a priest and you're in a church and somebody else is preaching or leading a service or whatever, we can be kind of critical.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, I've told you this, I give thanks every Sunday that we have you at St. Elizabeth's.
Wow,
and
thank you.
And because your spirituality comes through and your authenticity.
Thank you.
And those being authentic to self is, of course, one I've worked hard to become.
Yeah. Well,
who I was. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'd be lying if I didn't say I was very much uncomfortable and intimidated at the beginning when I'd look out and see a bunch of retired clergy, because I know how I am when I sit in a service and someone else is doing it, But I have just come to feel very comfortable with everyone.
Take it as a compliment, because we usually don't stick around in places.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you to you and to Ken and for all your love and support and your presence.
You're
and
welcome.
This has been a joy and an honor to walk with you. I appreciate you. Once again, people listen. She came forward, and I need you to come forward too. So thanks, Donna.
Yeah.
Take care.